The silence before the storm, Greta Thunberg's story does not begin on a world stage, holding a microphone before thousands, but in the quiet corners of her own mind, where the noise of the world felt overwhelming and the silence inside her was even louder. As a child in Sweden, Greta was known for her sensitivity, an almost surgical awareness of injustice, cruelty, and imbalance. While other children played without a care, she absorbed news headlines about melting ice caps and species extinction as if they were personal messages sent directly to her heart. This acute perception, however, came with a cost. By the age of 11, she had fallen into a period of deep depression, withdrawing from friends, skipping school, and losing interest in the very things that once brought her joy. The weight she carried wasn't visible to most. It was an invisible, suffocating pressure, a blend of anxiety, sadness, and a gnawing sense of urgency about a planet she had never set foot beyond. Her parents, deeply concerned, struggled to understand how a young girl could feel so much responsibility for something so vast, yet Greta herself could not turn away. The images of polar bears stranded on shrinking ice, forests burning uncontrollably, and oceans suffocating under plastic waste haunted her days and nights. This was not just empathy. It was a profound psychological wound, a grief for a home she believed was slipping away. Mental health experts often speak about eco-anxiety, the chronic fear of environmental doom, but for Greta, it was not an abstract term. It was her lived reality. It gnawed at her sense of purpose, deepened her isolation, and fueled a cycle of despair that seemed impossible to escape. But somewhere within that stillness, something was forming, not yet visible, but quietly, building strength. The girl who felt powerless was about to discover that even the smallest voice can disrupt the world's most deafening silence. This was the beginning of a journey where mental health and sustainability would intertwine in ways few had ever imagined. Finding the spark, the turning point in Greta Thunberg's mental health journey came not from medication, nor from withdrawing further into herself, but from a single, stubborn decision to act. It began in August 2018. She skipped school for the first time to sit outside the Swedish parliament with a simple sign, Skolstrejk för klimatet school, strike for climate. Too many. It was a silent protest. Lifeline. The act of showing up, even in stillness, became her bridge between paralysis and purpose. Sitting alone on the cold pavement, she wasn't just calling for political change. She was confronting the heavy fog in her own mind in those early days. She had no idea that her quiet protest would ignite a movement spanning continents. What she did know was that for the first time in years she felt anchored. The depression that had once made getting out of bed seem impossible began to loosen its grip. The anxiety that had silenced her voice started to find expression not through endless internal battles, but through a message the world desperately needed to hear. Mental health, she realized, could be nurtured by aligning one's actions with one's values. For Greta, speaking for the earth was not a burden anymore. It was medicine. Psychologists call this meaning-focused coping, transforming pain into purpose, channeling fear into constructive action. Greta embodied this principle instinctively. Each day she sat outside Parliament. She noticed something shift inside her, not just in her mood, but in her sense of identity. She was no longer just a young girl battling depression. She was becoming a symbol, a catalyst, a force. And as more people stopped to listen, to join, or even to challenge her, she discovered something profound, that healing the planet and healing the self can be part of the same journey. The spark had been lit, and it was about to set the world and her own life on fire. When one voice becomes many, what began as a solitary act on the steps of the Swedish parliament soon became a gathering storm. At first, passers-by saw only a quiet teenager with a handmade sign. But photographs began to circulate online, and the ripple grew. Students from nearby schools visited out of curiosity. Some stayed. Journalists began to ask questions. And then, almost imperceptibly, Greta's personal lifeline transformed into a movement, one that others recognized as their own cry for help. not just for the planet, but for the anxiety, fear, and helplessness that climate change had stirred in them. 2. By late 2018, Fridays for Future had become a phrase heard in dozens of countries. School strikes were popping up in Australia, Germany, the UK, and beyond. Greta, once isolated by depression, now found herself at the center of a global chorus. Yet she did not romanticize this new role. Pressure was immense, the scrutiny relentless. Still, she drew strength from the knowledge that this was no longer her battle alone. It belonged to everyone who believed that a livable planet was worth fighting for. The act of carrying this shared purpose became for her a stabilizing force against the undercurrents of mental strain. This expansion wasn't just political. It was deeply psychological. Greta's journey shows us that connection, authentic, mission-driven connection, can be a balm for mental wounds. By transforming her private struggles into a public mission, she found solidarity, and in solidarity, she found resilience. The voices rising alongside hers didn't just amplify her message. They echoed back to her a truth she had almost forgotten. She wasn't alone, and she never had to be again. What was once a whisper of defiance had become a roar of unity, and that roar was both a call to action and a lifeline. The weight of a planet on her shoulders with recognition came an invisible weight, one that Greta could feel pressing against her every waking moment. Overnight, she was not just a Swedish schoolgirl skipping class for a cause. She was the face of a generation's climate grief, an icon whose words could stir hope or provoke fury. Every speech, every tweet, every facial expression was dissected, praised or attacked. For someone who had once withdrawn from the world because of sensory and emotional overwhelm, this new level of exposure was both empowering and exhausting. The very stage that amplified her voice also magnified her. Vulnerability. The world began to demand more of her, more appearances, more statements, more solutions, as if one young activist could single-handedly shoulder the burden of planetary survival. Critics accused her of being naive or manipulated, while supporters placed her on an impossible pedestal. Greta understood that this was not about her as a person, yet the line between the movement and her identity blurred. Managing her mental health became an act of deliberate discipline, choosing when to engage, when to retreat, and when to let silence speak louder than words. This period revealed a paradox. The same activism that had helped her heal was also a potential source of burnout. Greta learned that sustainability is not just about ecosystems, it's about sustaining the self. Her journey was no longer just a fight for the planet's survival, but a lesson in balancing the demands of purpose with the necessity of rest. In facing the weight of a planet on her shoulders, she began to understand that resilience is not forged in constant action, but in the rhythm of pushing forward and pulling back. Redefining leadership on her own terms, Greta soon realized that the traditional image of a leader, endlessly visible, constantly performing, and perpetually on, was incompatible with her own mental health needs. She refused to mold herself into a version of leadership that required self-erasure. Instead, she began to demonstrate a quieter, more intentional model of influence. It was leadership not rooted in charisma or dominance, but in authenticity, restraint, and clarity of purpose. She could stand before the United Nations and speak with piercing conviction, then retreat from the spotlight without apology. This rhythm was not weakness. It was strategy. Her approach disrupted the cultural, an assumption that impact comes only from relentless exposure. Greta's absences became as powerful as her presence, reminding the world that sustainability must apply to human beings as much as to forests and oceans. She showed that leaders can say no without abandoning their cause, that one can fight fiercely while protecting their inner world. For Greta, preserving her mental well-being was not selfish. It was a form of resistance against a culture that exploits both people and planet until exhaustion. In reframing leadership, Greta created space for others who feel too introverted, anxious, or neurodivergent to believe they can make a difference. She proved that you don't have to match the world's pace to change its direction. By leading in alignment with her mental health, She gave permission for a new generation of activists to see self-care not as an indulgence, but as a prerequisite for lasting change. This was not just her fight for the earth, it was a reclamation of what it means to be a leader in an age of crisis. The balance between visibility and survival, as Greta's influence grew, so did the pressure to be constantly available for interviews, speeches, and appearances that could keep the climate crisis in the headlines. Yet Greta understood something. Most leaders learn too late. Constant visibility can lead to burnout, eroding both message and messenger. She began to carefully choose where and when to speak, ensuring that each moment carried maximum weight. This wasn't withdrawal. It was a conscious act of preservation. Her silence between moments of action gave her words a sharper edge when she returned. This balance was radical in a media ecosystem addicted to perpetual engagement. Greta showed that stepping back doesn't mean disappearing. It can mean creating space for the message to breathe, for others to step forward, and for the leader to recover. Her strategy mirrored the rhythms of nature: growth, rest, and renewal. Just as ecosystems cannot thrive without periods of dormancy, human beings cannot sustain high-impact work without cycles of restoration. In protecting herself, Greta protected. Her cause or approach resonated deeply with young activists who were burning out under the weight of their own urgency. She became proof that you can fight for the future without sacrificing your present. That sustainability isn't just about clean energy or biodiversity. It's about designing a life that can carry the fight for decades. This subtle but profound shift in activism became one of her greatest contributions, redefining the relationship between mental resilience and public leadership in the climate movement. Asterisk. When personal healing becomes public, Mission Greta's mental health journey was never a hidden subplot. It was an integral thread in her public narrative. She openly spoke about her years of depression, selective mutism, and the isolating effects of feeling disconnected from a world that seemed indifferent to a burning planet. This vulnerability, far from weakening her credibility, amplified it. People could see that her activism was not born from a place of detached idealism, but from the visceral need to heal, and in that healing, to help others heal too. The transformation was not instantaneous. Standing outside the Swedish parliament with her now iconic sign, Skolstryk för klimatet, was as much an act of reclaiming her voice as it was a call to action for the planet. The quiet persistence of those early days carried the DNA of someone who understood that mental health recovery requires consistency, purpose, and connection. By turning her private struggle into a public mission, she bridged the gap between personal survival and collective action. Over time, Greta's message expanded beyond emissions and policies to something deeper: that the fight for the climate is inseparable from the fight for mental well-being. The anxiety so many young people feel about the planet's future is not a disorder to be medicated away. It's a legitimate emotional response to a reality that demands change. Greta reframed climate anxiety as a signal, not a flaw, transforming a generation's fear into a catalyst for collective resilience. Asterisk. Shaping a new culture of activism, Greta Thunberg's journey did more than spark protest. It reshaped what activism looks like in the 21st century. Her honest conversations about mental health broke taboos, inviting young people to recognize that emotional struggle and social action are deeply connected. She challenged the stereotype of the always energetic activist, proving that vulnerability and strength coexist. This opened space for a more compassionate movement, one that values self-care as much as social change. Her leadership inspired organizations and activists worldwide to rethink their approaches. Mental health support became a key part of activist training programs. Conversations about burnout, anxiety, and depression moved from whispers to headlines. Greta's example showed that resilience is not just physical stamina or endless commitment. It is also emotional awareness and boundaries. Sustainability now includes caring for the caretakers themselves, acknowledging that the planet's health depends on the well-being of those fighting for it. This cultural shift extended beyond climate activism. Greta's openness catalyzed broader discussions about the psychological impact of global crises, from pandemics to social justice movements. By centering mental health, she created a blueprint for sustainable activism that balances passion with preservation. Her influence redefined what it means to lead authentically in a world facing unprecedented challenges, and her impact will ripple through generations to come. Asterisk strategies for mental resilience. Amid global pressure facing the relentless spotlight and immense expectations, Greta developed practical strategies to safeguard her mental health. She embraced routines that grounded her moments of solitude in nature, deep breathing and reflection that helped calm the storm of anxiety swirling. Inside, these practices were not mere self-indulgences, but necessary rituals that fortified her mind against burnout. Through them, she demonstrated that sustainability extends inward, requiring daily care for one's emotional ecosystem. Greta also learned the importance of setting firm boundaries. Despite the urgency of her mission, she knew when to say no whether to media requests or speaking engagements to preserve her energy. This discipline was a radical act in a world that often rewards constant availability and overcommitment. By prioritizing her well-being, she modeled how activists can sustain long-term engagement without sacrificing mental health. Furthermore, she surrounded herself with a trusted support system, family, close friends, and mental health professionals who provided refuge amid the chaos. This network reminded her that leadership does not mean facing the world alone. Her openness about seeking help shattered stigmas and encouraged others to do the same. Greta's mental resilience is a testament to the power of self-care, connection, and intentional living in the face of overwhelming global challenges. Asterisk the intersection of mental health and sustainability. Greta Thunberg's journey reveals a profound truth. Mental health and sustainability are inseparable. Caring for the planet means caring for ourselves, and vice versa. The environmental crises we face mirror an internal crisis of disconnection, anxiety, and despair. When ecosystems collapse, human ecosystems, the relationships, emotions, and communities that sustain us also suffer. Greta's activism highlights how healing the earth requires healing the mind. This connection is reflected in the growing awareness of eco-anxiety, a condition marked by chronic worry about the future of the planet. Greta's openness about her own struggles helped destigmatize this experience, showing that it is a natural, even necessary response to ecological devastation. More importantly, she transformed this anxiety into a call for collective action, illustrating that sustainability must include emotional resilience and mental well-being by advocating for systemic change alongside personal healing. Greta challenges us to rethink sustainability beyond policies and technologies. It demands a holistic approach, one that nurtures green spaces and mental spaces alike. In this way, she bridges science and psychology, activism and self-care, reminding us that the fight for a sustainable future is also a fight for a sustainable self. Inspiring a generation to care differently. Greta's mental health journey has inspired millions to rethink not only how they care for the planet, but also how they care for themselves. Her story speaks to a generation overwhelmed by information, uncertainty, and fear, a generation searching for meaning amid crisis. By sharing her vulnerability, Greta gave them permission to acknowledge their own mental struggles without shame or silence. This shift has empowered young activists worldwide to prioritize emotional well-being as part of their activism. They are learning that fighting for change requires strength, but also compassion for oneself. Greta's example encourages them to balance urgency with patience, action with reflection. Her impact transcends climate. It fosters a culture where sustainability includes mental health as a core value. Through this, Greta has helped transform the narrative around activism from relentless pressure and burnout to one of resilience and self-care. Her leadership shows that caring for the earth and caring for the mind are not separate battles, but intertwined paths. This holistic approach offers hope that the movement can endure, grow, and thrive. Sustainably. Asterisk, the role of community and connection.
Yes.
Journey underscores the power of community in sustaining mental health amid the challenges of activism. From her early days sitting alone outside the Swedish parliament, she gradually found strength in numbers of fellow students, activists, and supporters who shared her vision and fears. This sense of belonging created a protective space where mental burdens were shared. Lessened and understood. Connection became both a shield and a source of motivation. Greta's story highlights that individual resilience is amplified by collective support. In a world often isolating and overwhelming, community offers grounding, empathy, and hope. Activists around the globe now actively foster these networks, recognizing that sustainability must include social and emotional sustainability. Moreover, the bonds formed through shared struggle create a feedback loop of encouragement and healing. Greta's leadership helped catalyze these connections, showing that activism isn't a lonely path, but a journey traveled together. In building this community, she not only advanced the climate cause, but also nurtured the mental well-being of an entire generation of change-makers. Lessons from Greta. Embracing vulnerability as strength. One of the most powerful lessons from Greta's mental health journey is the radical embrace of vulnerability. In a world that often equates strength with invulnerability, Greta challenged this narrative by openly sharing her struggles with depression and anxiety. Her transparency shattered stigmas and showed that admitting pain is not a weakness, but a courageous act of strength. By doing so, she invited others to confront their own fears and uncertainties without shame. Vulnerability became a bridge to deeper connection between activists, communities, and the planet itself. Greta's example teaches us that healing, both personal and collective, requires honesty about our emotional realities. This lesson resonates far beyond climate activism, calls on all of us to rethink how we define resilience. True resilience is not about hiding struggles, but acknowledging them, learning from them, and using them to fuel compassionate action. Greta's journey illuminates a path where vulnerability is not just accepted, but honored as a vital source of power. Asterisk, the ripple effect. Mental health. Beyond Greta Thunberg's openness about her mental health has sparked a global conversation, far beyond her own story. Activists, educators, and mental health professionals are now collaborating to address the emotional toll of climate change on young people worldwide. Schools incorporate lessons on eco-anxiety, and organizations develop resources to support activists' well-being. This ripple effect highlights how one individual's courage can transform collective awareness. Greta's transparency created space for millions to recognize that their feelings of despair or fear are valid responses, not signs of weakness. This validation is critical. It shifts the conversation from silence and stigma to dialogue and support. By bridging mental health and real sustainability, Greta has helped build a movement that values emotional resilience as much as environmental action. Her legacy encourages us to nurture not only the planet, but also the minds and hearts of those dedicated to protecting it. The journey she began continues. It's growing stronger and more compassionate with each step. Asterisk, carrying the torch forward is Greta's mental health journey intertwines with her climate activism. It leaves a profound challenge for all of us to carry forward this integrated vision of sustainability and well-being. It's a call to recognize that protecting the planet means also protecting our minds, emotions, and communities. The battle is not only external, but internal. Success depends on nurturing both. Her story teaches that resilience is cultivated through intention, self-care, and connection. It invites us to listen deeply to our fears, hopes, and to the urgent whispers of the earth itself. This integrated approach equips us to face the immense challenges ahead without losing ourselves in despair or exhaustion. Greta's journey is a beacon, showing that healing the planet and healing ourselves are not separate paths, but one shared mission. Now more than ever, we must rise to this call. By embracing the lessons Greta embodies, we can create a sustainable future that honors mental health as foundational. The torch she carries is not hers alone. it is one we all hold, lighting the way toward a more resilient, compassionate world. Asterisk, if Greta's journey has inspired you, take a moment to reflect on your own mental well-being and your connection to the planet. Share this story with someone who needs hope today. Join a local environmental group. Start small, sustainable habits. And remember, caring for yourself is a vital part of caring for the Earth. Together, we can build a future where both the planet and our minds thrive.